And welcome to another demo day with apexanalytix and Akhilesh Agarwal. My name is Danny Thompson. I'm SVP of Market and Product Strategy for Apex, and Akhilesh is responsible for our global business partner technology solutions. And I can't wait for you to get to see the demo that Akhilesh is going to show. It's some really exciting bank account controls that we've been developing. Akhilesh and his team have been developing with our clients. If you know Apex, you know that we are a bunch of the Fortune 500 and Global 2000 clients out there, companies out there are using apexportal and controls that are supported by Akhilesh and his team to onboard suppliers and keep vendor master data protected, complete, and up to date. And the big challenge that everyone's been facing in the last year is this huge rise in business email compromise and other sorts of bank account fraud. Basically, how do you control bank account changes in this new remote world that we've been working in the last year and a half? There's just been a huge spike in fraud attempts. And it's been a really fun year working with our really experienced clients to come up with controls, implement even more and more controls to make sure that when bank account changes happen, they are safe and protected. Akhilesh, I don't know if you have anything to add before I talk through what scenarios we're going to go through.
Thanks for that introduction, Danny. Yeah, why don't you go ahead and share the scenarios, and then I'll be happy to walk through each of those in my demo.
Great. And this is going to be, we want this to be an interactive session, so I'm going to have my eye on the chat window, the Q&A window. If you have any questions as we're going along for Akhilesh or just generally about bank account controls, or even if you have comments around bank account controls and things that you're doing that are working well, just raise them in the comments and we'll raise them as we go along or at the end. There are 4 scenarios that we think are really critical that we want to showcase today around bank account changes. One is, first of all, the first thing you need to do is make sure you know who is coming in to make a bank account change. And so Akhilesh is going to show how our portal clients are using technology in the portal to control who has access to make bank account changes. The second scenario is going to be, okay, somebody's gotten logged in, they're on the appropriate form to make a bank account change. Now let's make them prove they really know about the banking relationship. So Akhilesh is going to showcase that. Then fourth, real-time bank integration to validate bank account ownership. It's really been shown in the last year that callbacks can't be relied upon, emails are easily compromised, and penny tests are really not good at confirming who owns a bank account, whether it's your supplier or not. So this real-time integration, we'll see how it works in the portal to reach out to the bank and validate that the supplier owns the bank account before you start making payments to it. And then lastly, a brand new control that Akhilesh has collaborated with our clients around that leverages information in the network of Apex data that works outside the US, works globally, and it works in the US to give you some confidence around a bank account that's being set up for a supplier based on information that we see that supplier has with other clients of Apex's and other activity we see around that supplier. So we'll get a little bit more into those scenarios as we go along. But first, I guess with that, I'll just hand it over to you, Akhilesh, to get started with the demo.
Thank you so much, Danny. So I'll start sharing my screen and go over through the use cases that we just discussed. What I am sharing now is our demo version of the Apex Supplier portal. I'll be going over through each of those scenarios in sequence. And the first scenario I want to start with is controlling access to making bank account changes or any other changes in the supplier's profile. Uh, the most common trending fraud issue in the industry today is the supplier's email or the work email itself is getting compromised from various examples we have seen recently of attempted fraud. So not only the applications that we're using to protect the data as well as protect incorrect payments from going out needs to be secure, but what we are seeing is the suppliers also need to make sure that their work email is not compromised. That's the number one trending issue. Now, we can't guarantee that 100% of the suppliers will have 100% of their work email secure. So we have built additional controls in the Apex portal to even mitigate that issue. So what I'm going to demonstrate first is an existing supplier login who's going to log in and attempt to make a bank account change. So one of the control features that we have is standard username password, but if the system detects that the supplier is attempting to log in from a different device, which may not be their work device like a work laptop, or they are logging in from a different or an unknown location, which is not usually their pattern of logging in based on the IP address, or they are logging in at different hours. So for example, a supplier typically logs in from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. in the evening, but there is a sudden login at 3 a.m. in the morning, which is suspicious login. So we are going to track that as well. So based on these examples, we have a lot more login pattern detection examples, but based on some of these examples, the system will get that alert on suspicious login attempt. And once it recognizes a suspicious login attempt, then it does two things that you see on the screen. One is an authentication code, which is sent to the supplier's email address. So in this case, I'm going to pretend I have this Gmail account. So this mailbox belongs to the supplier. And the moment I try to log in, the system generated an authentication code sent to this mailbox. And now I can copy and paste this in the account, in my account in the Apex portal. So what this proves is that I have access to the password. It also proves that I have access to my work email as a supplier. But as I stated earlier, the supplier's work email could also get compromised. So to mitigate that, we have this additional security question and answer, which get triggered. When the supplier logs in for the first time, they are requested to set up at least 5 different security questions and provide answers to which only they are knowledgeable about. So once the suspicious login gets triggered, we capture the authentication code. We also capture the security question. And now if I try to submit, it will authenticate the details based on my account and either pass or fail the login attempt. One common question that we get here is, why don't we use cell phone-based multi-factor authentication? So cell phone-based multi-factor works great for a B2C application, business to consumer. But in case of B2B applications like a supplier portal, we don't want to use cell phone-based authentication because we don't know whether that user is still employed at the supplier's business. So that's why we want to use the work email address as the best practice, tied up with a security question and answer. So that's the very first step in controlling who has access to update and whether are we successfully authenticating the user or not. Now at this stage, I'm logged in as a supplier, and based on the roles and permissions that I have, I have the ability to go in and update my profile. So I'm going to click Update Profile to begin the bank account change process. Once I log in to my profile, there are a number of pages as part of our vendor registration portal. So I have the ability to add tax information or change it, address information, and so on and so forth. What we are focusing on today is the bank account change process. So we can see the payment method for this supplier is electronic payment. We also have one bank account on file, which belongs to Wells Fargo Bank. In order to change the supplier's bank account, I can go in and hit edit. And now I see some of the existing banking details, like which address the bank is tied to. It's all of my addresses as a supplier. What is the bank country, the routing number, and so on and so forth. You will notice that the account number is hidden or masked, and only the last 4 digits are being displayed. So we have one more fraud prevention control here, that in spite of the login and authentication that we have done, we still cannot trust the end user for a sensitive change like a bank account number change. So we have built in multiple layers of protection to help along with the fraud mitigation process. So masking the account number helps with that. Now, if I attempt to change the account number to a different account number, which is what a potential fraudster would do, a pop-up screen will appear asking the user to authenticate with the full account number which is present on file. Unless I know the existing account number, I will not be allowed to change the record to a new account number. So this is just one more layer of protection. So now if I go into my business files and being a genuine user, I would know what my exact account number is. Only then I'll be able to proceed. So if I enter a value which doesn't match the record, the system will not allow that change, and this error message will come up saying incorrect current value. So now if I change it to the actual bank account number, which is on record as per the client's ERP database, it will allow that change. So at this time, I can go in and make the change to a new bank account number. So far, just to summarize, we talked about authenticating the user, making sure the user is genuine and is the right person accessing the system. We added additional layer of protection by making sure we do multi-factor authentication to verify access to work email and the security question and answer. Then we verified whether the user is knowledgeable about the current account number, which is present on this supplier record. Now, if I try to change this account number and submit, we also want to protect this change to making sure the new account number also belongs to the supplier. So that's an additional control, and I'll showcase how that works. So at this point, I will hit submit, and the supplier is now allowed to make the change. But this change is not approved yet, so it still has to go through additional checks and balances like I described, go through the workflow before hitting the ERP.
Hey, Akhilesh, one thing that people might be wondering is if somebody's gotten through and logged in and they've answered the security questions, what are the odds that they're not going to know the bank account number? And it just reminded me of the scenario that we've seen with some clients lately around shared email addresses like accounts receivable at supplier.com, and how that has presented a risk for some clients. You want to talk about that for a second?
Sure. Thanks for that question, Danny. That's a very interesting scenario to your point. In a lot of cases, we have seen a supplier would have a shared mailbox, like the example you gave, accounts receivable. And this shared mailbox is being accessed by multiple people or employees at the supplier's company. Now, shared mailboxes is a big no in terms of security best practices. So when you are onboarding a supplier as a risk mitigation strategy, you should always try and ensure that shared mailboxes are not getting used. But in the event they do get used, what will now happen is more than one person can get to know the authentication code that gets generated through the Apex portal, so that when they attempt to log in and the code gets sent to their work email, now it lands on a shared mailbox, and therefore one or more persons could impersonate the end user and gain access to the system. So that's one disadvantage of a shared mailbox. Now we added another control like the security question, but the security question in some cases could be a very simple answer, again, provided by the supplier, and through social engineering, it is possible to get those answers and still authenticate and get to this banking screen. So those are some of the possibilities. If the supplier has not, opted out of the shared mailboxes, or the supplier did not select a good security and answer that no one would be aware of. So that's why we built in some additional preventive measures on this banking screen, so that we ask the current account number before allowing a change to a new account number. So the possibility of that end user knowing the existing account number is rare, because most of the fraud cases that we have seen in the industry is an external actor who's outside of the supplier's organization trying to make the change, and therefore they would not be aware of the existing account number, and this layer of protection helps mitigate that issue. But we still haven't solved for insider frauds or attempted frauds. And that's what I want to talk about next with the bank account number validation. So thanks for asking that question, Danny.
Yeah, thank you.
So now on this screen, I have entered an account number, which is a new account number that I'm trying to change to. So now I'm going to hit submit, and the system is going to accept this change, but it's not approved yet. It's not sent to the ERP yet. So we'll discuss how the workflow looks like and the vendor approval process looks like. Once these changes are submitted, it is possible for the vendor to maybe add additional bank accounts. So one more feature that we have in the system is what we call UK Corporate Criminal Offence Act, or compliance with that act. So once a new bank account change is submitted, and I go in and add a new bank account, so let's say this time I'll go into the system and select a different country like United Kingdom. So if I go and select this address, existing address for the vendor, but instead of United States, I'll pick UK as an example. Now, the moment I pick UK, one more thing you will see out of the box feature is, based on different countries of the bank, we ask the relevant information automatically. For every single country in the world, it's pre-configured out of the box. So for US, it was the routing number and account number, but for UK, it's the IBAN number and the sort code and the SWIFT code and so on and so forth. Now, let's assume the supplier has entered this information. I won't go in and fill out that page yet. But if the supplier attempts to enter a foreign bank account, which does not match with their supplier country, what will happen is additional banking questions get triggered in terms of compliance and risk mitigation. So over here, you can see these three additional questions have come up on the screen. The first question is, do you have company policies in place in respect of business ethics, anti-bribery and corruption, anti-money laundering, and prevention of facilitation of tax evasion? So in terms of compliance, we want to ensure both the clients as well as their suppliers are mitigating this risk and complying with the local rules and regulations. Then we are asking the supplier a question: in which jurisdiction is the company subject to tax on its profits? And then lastly, which country would you be providing services? Which country soil would you be providing services? So these additional data points helps you comply with the UK CCO Act, which is the Corporate Criminal Offence Act, as well as other tax or money laundering regulations worldwide. So this is a standard configuration out of box, and you can take advantage of it. So for this demo, what I'm going to do is, since I've shown you how this feature works, I'm going to remove the UK bank account and proceed with submitting this record and let's see how our validations work. Now, as I navigate through the registration, there are some additional pages like insurance information, business biography. So all of this type of information can be collected from the supplier, including diversity. And then finally, once the supplier has confirmed all of these details, we can go ahead and submit the record. So I'm going to go ahead and submit this change. And now it will do additional validations in the system, including the bank account validation, and we'll see how the approval queue looks like. So I'm going to log out now as a supplier. I'm changing roles. And now I'm going to log in as one of the vendor master team approvers and see what that record looks like in my approval queue. So now this is the client login. I'm pretending to be an approver in the vendor master team, or as per different clients, they can designate different types of approvers in the workflows. When this change hits the workflow, you can see one of the statuses pending approval. The vendor name is Smith and Associates Consulting, and the vendor controls has a red X, meaning one or more validations have failed. So if I hit on the red X and I look at the vendor controls, it gives me a listing of all of the checks and balances we did in the system, including the bank account validation. So you will notice the address validation is good. The supplier name as entered by the supplier and what the supplier entered in the banking screen as account holder name, they're matching, but this is based on what the supplier entered. So we are just doing a mismatch check to ensure it's the same. But then there is a bank account validation check. This check is done for United States, Sweden, and India. And for these three countries in the world, we are able to validate not only if the routing number and the bank master information is accurate, but also whether the account number exists with this bank and if the ownership of that account matches the name of the vendor. So you will see a result here, account holder name does not match with the name on bank's record. So what the supplier entered here is not matching with the checking or savings account in that bank record. So that's the first red alert. And the second is we are also able to validate the account opening date for banks in the United States. So it has an additional data point. Account opening date is within last 7 days. So those are the two red flags. It's a recent account which was opened in a bank and the name is not matching, a typical fraud scenario. So you saw all of the controls during login to make sure it is the correct person logging in. We prevented an external person who may not be aware of the vendor details from making the change by asking the existing account number. But then we also protecting against insider fraud, where an employee of the company may be trying to change the account to their own personal checking account, for example. And now this additional control where we verify the ownership has failed and it will not go through. Now, the approver has a possibility of rejecting the change. We are also providing some Apex best practice recommendations, and this is configurable, meaning you can decide for yourself what your own recommendation should be for your own, approvers. So we are stating here that number one, because this is an attempted fraud or a possible fraud, you should put a payment block on this vendor immediately until your investigation is over on why such a change is happening. Now you can validate all of the login activity as well through the audit controls that are built into the Apex portal. You can even discuss this change with the vendor by making a phone call to them or talking to different people in the vendor's organization. And of course, gather hard evidence of this account change. Because there is an attempted fraud, the due diligence can be now more effective instead of a traditional way where you're just calling, but you don't really know that that change is good or bad. You're just having to trust the vendor on a callback. So this additional data point and red flags will give you that confidence on talking to the vendor and making sure it's a good investigation. And once that is complete, you can either reject it if it was an attempted fraud or approve the change if it was as expected. So that's one of the additional mitigation controls in preventing money going into the wrong hands. Just to summarize, we mentioned we do this check for 3 countries in the world: United States, India, and Sweden. And the next question subsequently becomes, what happens if the vendor actually enters an accurate bank account number, and how does the system work? So what I'll do now is I'll quickly talk about one additional scenario where the checks and balances will pass. And then we'll talk about how we mitigate risk for all other countries worldwide. So if I log in back as the vendor, and now that the check failed, and maybe I talked to the client and I discussed that, no, that change was not expected. So I'm going to go back and put the right account number, which is expected. So now if I go back in here, I can copy paste the accurate account number. So basically reverting back to how it was earlier. And this time I'll submit this change and let the system do the validations all over again. So now that I've made this change, I'll go back and submit the record and let it go through the approval process again. So changing roles, I logged out as a supplier. Now I'm logging back in as the vendor master approval person.
So just to add some commentary, just so everybody really understands what happened. You submitted a bad bank account change and a good bank account change. In each case, when the supplier submitted the bank account change, in the background, the Apex portal called SmartVM bank account validation to reach out to the bank, to the consortium of banks that has the directory of bank account owners, and it validated whether the bank account was and matched the supplier name and bank account on the vendor record that was edited, matched the bank account at the bank and the owner of that bank account at the bank, and sent the results back in real time to display in this queue. And the first time it came back and said, there's some problems. This time the results should be different.
Thanks for that, Dane. So now I've submitted a change which is a valid account number. And as you can see, the controls have changed. The results are passing as far as the bank account validation is concerned. And you can see a green tick instead of a red X. And it says account is verified as an open account and a valid savings account in this instance. The customer data passed authentication, meaning not only is the account valid and open with the bank, but then ownership verification has also passed, right? So the vendor name matches the owner name on the bank record. So the recommendation here is this account should be accepted for a bank account and or customer data for this inquiry. So now you're confident that the change is accurate. You save a lot of time on making a call back to the vendor or doing some offline processes. You can, because this is a validation and everything is passing, you could approve the change and move forward. And a lot of cases now, clients are using something called automated banking, where if all of the checks and balances that you see on the screen pass, everything's a green tick, then you can even potentially allow the system to auto approve. So it becomes a completely touchless system, and you're only intervening when there is an exception, saving you hundreds of man hours or person hours in reviewing such changes.
Hey, so Akhilesh, we got a question from Siriwan. Why is bank account validation only available in the US, India, and Sweden? Would it be possible to expand the country coverage over time? And I know that kind of feeds into your next section, but maybe you could take a second to talk about why those 3 countries are active and the others aren't.
Sure. So in terms of validation, just for context, our Smart VM APIs have over 650 external data sources that we connect to, and that list is growing every day as we speak. The way we designed Smart VM was to reach out to official data sources like government entities or regulatory bodies which actually issue such identities or bank account numbers or tax IDs or address details and so on and so forth. So that's what we call validation. So in terms of bank account ownership, only US, India, and Sweden have a official registry that everyone can trust. In the US, it's tied to a bank consortium. And through that bank consortium, we do a real-time API validation and we present the results in the Apex portal. Similarly, the government of India and the government of Sweden have officially published a registry. And again, we can connect it through a API in real time and validate it. For other countries worldwide, we don't have an official government registry or official bank registry, if you will, to do similar validations. So Apex is constantly doing research on this. And if we do find there's an official registry for any other country, we'll be happy to retrofit that and provide additional country validations.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, if anyone on the call today knows of an official registry in any country in the world, please let us know because we would love to integrate with it. And certainly as we find those sources, we'll integrate them and make them available to all of our clients as appropriate.
Thank you for that, Danny, and thanks for that question. So what we saw so far was a failure on a bank account ownership validation and a pass on a bank account ownership validation. There are a few more security controls that are built into the system that I want to talk about. So you can see there's an additional bank account changes validation. So what do we mean by bank changes? We have seen some attempted fraud scenarios where the bank account was attempted for a change multiple times in a given week. For example, in case of a supplier record, the bank account changed like almost 7 times in a week span, almost every single day. That's not a real life scenario with any vendor. No vendor will change their bank account every single day for 7 consecutive days. So what we did as a lesson learned from that scenario is we need to build in additional control for detecting frequent bank account changes. So that's an additional layer of protection that's built into the system. And the approvers will get alerted if we see that anomaly happen with any supplier record. We validate bank master for all countries in the world. So unlike ownership validation, if we talk about SWIFT codes, IBAN numbers, bank routing numbers for every single country in the world globally, we do out-of-box bank code validation, which is the routing number for that country or the SWIFT code for that country. So that's also built in. And lastly, we also have duplicate bank account validation as one more additional control. And this also helps prevent fraud in a lot of cases where you have 2 different unique suppliers. They're not related to each other in any way, but they happen to use the same routing number and account number, and therefore it's a potential issue, right? Maybe that imposter was able to change bank account numbers for more than one supplier record, which would be a big problem. So we also built in this duplicate bank validation as one more layer of protection. So in a sense, there's no silver bullet that with one control, you're going to solve the issue of risk mitigation and fraud prevention. But all of these controls combined as multiple layers of protection reduces the risk to a bare minimum. So those are all of the validation controls that I wanted to talk about today. Now, as Danny mentioned earlier, there's a brand new feature that Apex has partnered with some of our clients, and now it's available for use, which is global bank pro validation or scoring by SmartVM. So now I want to talk about what that scoring is and how it would help you on a global basis. So what I'm going to do is close out this supplier profile, and let's take a look at a few more supplier profiles in my approval queue. So as an example, let's take the Intel Corp, which is a supplier record in the demo system. And let's take a look at bank account details for this supply and see how it looks like. So if I open the supplier record for Intel, and let's say Intel being a global company, they have bank accounts in US, but also outside US. So Intel may have a bank account in Europe or China or Singapore and any other countries, right? So we talked about how we protect the ownership, bank account ownership through a validation for 3 countries. But apexanalytix is in a very unique situation where we have a database called SmartVM with APIs, and this database now consists of 40 million supplier records worldwide. We have hundreds of Fortune 500 companies using the system in one way or the other with one service of Apex or the other. And over the last 30 years of our business doing audit services, providing software as a service for apexportal, providing duplicate payment prevention controls. We have built this database of 40 million suppliers, which is a golden record of those suppliers with validated information, and also scoring about how accurate the phone number of the supplier is, how accurate the email address is, how accurate the address is. And now we are able to create accuracy scores of the bank account ownership for those 40 million suppliers in our database. So for every supplier worldwide, the common question is, how do I know whether the ownership is good or not? So using our bank account scoring methodology that we have created, it's a proprietary score created by Apex. We are able to take a global supplier like Intel, having bank accounts in any country, match it with our database of 40 million suppliers and millions of bank accounts in the process. And if we find a match, we are able to check how likely the bank account belongs to that supplier or not. And based on that finding, we can either pass the record or fail the record. So you can see an example of a failure here. The bank account entered for this supplier has a match score of 20 out of 100, which is a very low score. We are indicating that the bank account does not match the supplier name. So we are aware of this routing number and account number in our database, but it has a different supplier name in SmartVM, and therefore the first red flag is account does not match the supplier name. There's an additional data point that this bank account has no known history of being used by the supplier. So not only the name match is failing, but we have never seen this account number being used by a company like Intel for this example. So there are 2 red flags. And based on that, we have provided a similar recommendation, which is tied to failure of a bank account check, right? So using the scorecard, we are able to now score suppliers on a global basis. And if a match is found with our 40 million supplier record database, then you get this added benefit of the scoring, and you can make an informed decision of rejecting or approving that account number change. So we took a look at how a failure works, but I do want to take another minute and show you how a pass scenario will work and how do we give you confidence that accept that change. So if I go back to the example of Smith and Associates Consulting, where I actually entered a good account number, and if I scroll down to see how the bank pro scoring or validation works, you'll notice here there's a different result on a pass. Match score in this case is 86 out of 100, which is a very high score. And we are indicating that this bank account is extensively used by the supplier and is well known for over 5 years. So based on our SmartVM database, we have seen this vendor multiple times. We have seen this account number multiple times. And many other clients are using the same account number to pay the supplier. So that's another positive. And on top of that, we have seen this account number getting used for over 5 years without any issues with fraud. So that's a great scorecard and great details behind the scenes on what all we are checking, and we are able to provide you with a positive confidence score. Now, those are not the only checks we are doing. We have an extensive list of over 30 different checks on this bank account matching process. So I just illustrated a few examples. But this is how a pass or fail scenario would work with the Bank Pro account score by SmartVM.
So Akhilesh, we've had a couple of questions come in. Are you ready?
Sure, go ahead.
So one question came in from Lisa, who said, I don't have apexportal. Do you offer this solution as a subscription? And I thought that would give you an opportunity to talk about just the SmartVM solution and how the app works, how it can be used to validate data in an existing vendor master, and maybe a little bit too about Proxy, which the Proxy portal, which is a really easy to deploy solution that people could be using as well.
Yeah, so excellent question. So as Danny mentioned, so if you don't happen to use the Apex portal today, you have two options. The number one is SmartVM as a subscription. So SmartVM can be deployed very easily using two methods. One is a simple web application, which allows a business user to upload data in a specific data file format, right? Just drag and drop the file, upload it in SmartVM app, and it will do all of the validations that you're seeing in the Apex portal and provide you with the results back in a dashboard and an output file. So you can literally take all your supplies in your ERP system, go through SmartVM, get the validations done, scorecards done, and get the results back. And you can do it as frequently as you want. So that's option one. Option two with SmartVM is using an API integration, which gives you real-time validation capabilities similar to the Apex portal. So if you subscribe to the API, you do need technical people to help you out with some internal development. So you gain access to the APIs, and your internal developers could consume those APIs in a system of your choice. You can consume it directly in your ERP, a homegrown system, or even a third-party system, and do similar validations like Apex portal in real time. So that's the second option with the SmartVM. The third option that Danny mentioned was for an Apex portal in proxy mode. So Apex portal in proxy mode means that without a full-blown implementation, we can quickly deploy a proxy portal for based on the subscription. A proxy portal can easily be deployed in a matter of a week or 10 days. And within that time frame, what we do is we stand up the best practice configured Apex portal, which is out of box. It's not a client specific configuration. And we are also not loading any of your existing vendors. So it's a simple out of box solution that can be quickly deployed. But once it is deployed and you have access to it, going forward, you could enter the supplier data like basic information, tax ID, address, and bank account number. And with these three different data points, you can take advantage of the validations built into the Apex portal. And once you're confident about the change, now you can swivel chair and enter that change in the ERP directly. So you can still take advantage of validations by manually keying in the data on behalf of the supplier in the Apex portal, but limited to the small amount of data that you want to validate. You don't have to enter the entire supplier profile in that context. So Apex Proxy Portal has been a tremendous advantage to a lot of clients who don't have the time, resources, or the budget to deploy the full-blown Apex portal, but still want to take advantage of these features in a short-term basis.
Yeah, and another word about the proxy supplier registration function, right? So it's what you demonstrated, Akhilesh, was the supplier going in and entering their bank account information and other information, hitting submit, and then the profile goes through an approval workflow. In proxy mode, your own vendor maintenance team or somebody inside the organization captures data from the supplier, really using whatever process you're using today, but then you key that data into the portal on behalf of the supplier, and then all the rest of the process is the same, all of the same validations and approval. Like a single stream approval workflow is established just for you to review the results of all of the validations. And it's useful not only in cases where people don't have aren't deploying the full supplier facing portal, but it's also an early value. It's a way for clients who are in the process of deploying the full-fledged supplier facing portal to get some early value, because we can set up the proxy registration capability just within a week or two or three of contract signing, and they can use that process for validating bank account information and tax ID information, et cetera, while the fuller implementation process is underway. So they get value even though the full-blown supplier-facing solution isn't available yet. So can provide a really nice major step forward in controls without having to wait on the full implementation to complete. So a couple of other, a related question is, are there audit reports for exceptions that occur along the way that also shows what the recommended action was?
Exactly. So every single change at a field level, meaning the before value, the old value, and the new value that got entered or approved, that is tracked in an audit report. Any exceptions are basically added based on this allowed list. So if an approver decides to approve a record, which is failing, like this tax ID example, the approver may choose to approve it and add it to an allow list, right? So once I hit the add allow list, the approver gets an option to add their comments on why are they accepting this change, so they can enter the conversation with the vendor or their internal reviews that they have done and hit submit. The comments will get added to the audit log as well, so you know who approved it and why. And all of this information is tracked in a consolidated audit report, tracking who approved it and when it was approved and what was the value approved and so on. So just to illustrate further, if I quickly go into the report section, there are a lot of standard reports built into the system, but one of them happens to be this audit report. And now you can see like every single action I took, every single modification I did at a field level, including this bank account number change is tracked. It tracks the person who made the change, and also once the record is approved, who reviewed and approved it will be tracked here. So we have extensive audit logging capabilities built into the system.
Is the full vendor control screen captured, or are you just capturing? Yeah.
Yeah, actually the full vendor control screen is captured. So what happens with vendor controls is the status or the validation date, every single data point, which is all the data fields in the database, they're listed here in the audit log. So yes, the same information is used to present the screen. So yes, we are capturing every single outcome of the approval.
So we got another question. Has the system ever caught a real fraud?
Yes, it has. Because of the controls built into the system, different clients of ours have caught different attempted frauds, right from the login process to the account number verification check failing or the validation check failing and so on. And preventive measures have been taken by the client. So Just for privacy reasons, I won't be able to disclose the exact name of the client or the supplier, but yes, the system has prevented real life fraud scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, we hear a lot from clients that they're just getting hit every day through their prior processes where they maybe previously would accept bank account changes through emails and phone calls to their help desk. They were getting those attacks every day. Uh, and with the portal, so much of that, it just doesn't even get into the process because while email is open to anybody in the world could set a bank account change request via email, um, very few people in the world know that that client has a supplier portal and has a user ID and password in order to log into that supplier portal. So just that alone cuts down on a ton of fraud. Um, but all of the rest of these controls help prevent a lot of bank account changes as well. We also, as Apex also has a solution called Fraud Detect, and has a vendor risk analysis service that goes and analyzes not only the supplier's banking information, but a lot of other information that is either in the supplier profile or in the transaction history for the supplier, and identifies fraudulent patterns, very suspicious patterns of activities. Maybe the invoice sequences are out of sequence, or um, there are some advanced analytics that are used in the fraud world to identify fraudulent invoice numbers that we use as part of that solution. And clients regularly find cases of either insider fraud or conspiracies between insiders and outsiders using those solutions. And by the way, that composite fraud score is also part of this vendor control screen that Akhilesh is showing.
Thanks for that, Danny. Any other questions?
Yeah, so does just everyone continue to submit any questions that you might have. We won't artificially keep everyone to the top of the hour, but if you have any, please let us know. We've seen a couple of really interesting fraud scenarios that happen. One kind of a famous one with one of our clients was when they acquired another company. As with so many companies, when you're acquiring another company, scrubbing the vendor master data is one of the last things that gets done in the system integration process. And often it just gets rushed. And what we see so commonly is they end up just saying, okay, what are all the active vendors in the acquired company's vendor master? Let's just quickly load them at the last minute into the vendor master. And one of our clients ended up importing a vendor master record that was being that had been set up by an insider to commit fraud. So it wasn't one of our clients' employees, but it was an employee of the company that they had acquired, had set up this fraudulent bank account, and they jammed it into their vendor master before they had any of these portal controls in place. And continued their fraud as part of the new company. And part of the fraud controls that are in our fraud detect solution in an Apex portal identified the fraud case, and they found millions of dollars in this multi-year fraud that was going on. Let's see, I don't see any other questions coming in. So maybe we'll just give it another minute. Akhilesh, is there anything else, any other stories that you think are relevant that we should try and squeeze in?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, just to summarize, all of the controls combined together is the key to success in preventing fraud and eliminating or mitigating the risk. People often look at some of the controls, but not all of them. So the guiding principle is, apply every possible control. And it's an evolutionary cycle. So what is good today may not be good anymore tomorrow. So that's what we keep working on. The Apex portal side is the controls keep getting evolved as the industry standard or the conditions change on attempted frauds, and we're constantly adding new controls. So that's part of our story as well on why we built the Apex portal in the first place.
Yeah, there's so many things that companies need to be doing to so many little pieces of this control framework that are required. It's more than a human can do to enforce all of these controls and still deliver on their business requirements of getting suppliers onboarded quickly. So what's kind of great about this API, it's doing all of those controls all in one step and just raising to the human that's part of the process anything that failed. And so the scope of what a human has to do to apply these controls is so much smaller than it would be otherwise. So they can just focus on the exceptions rather than having to go and perform all of these checks themselves. That's what people love about it. I should mention to everyone, there is a poll question that's been raised up in the WebEx. It's really just an opportunity for you as a participant to ask for more information about the different kinds of products and services or white papers that are available around this subject and other things that Apex might be able to help you with. So if you have any interest in getting some more information, just fill out that poll question in the WebEx and hit submit, and we'll be happy to get back in touch with you and share additional information. And I think that will be it. We'll give everybody just a minute to complete the poll question if they would like. And then, of course, if you have any additional questions, continue to raise them in the Q&A or chat. And if we didn't get to them on the call today, then we'll get to them soon, get back to you with any questions. And of course, you can come to the website, company website, and raise any questions you have. And of course, you can find Akhilesh and we're both on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect to us there. We'd love to connect with you. You can raise questions to us there at any time. All right. Well, with that, I'll say thank you very much, Akhilesh. It's, I think, really informative for people to actually see something working rather than looking at marketing slides. And it's a really cool system that you and our clients have put together.
Thank you, Danny, and thank you, Angela, for hosting the webinar today.
Great. Can't wait to see what you guys do next.
Super excited for that.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone who joined. We'll continue the demo webinar series in the weeks ahead and hope to see you as we demo other cool features inside Apex Portal.